Hello and welcome back to Matt's Automotive Channel. Today we're going to be installing the Z23 pad and rotor kit from American Muscle, while going step by step and showing you all the tools necessary to complete this job. We're both the front and rear brakes. On this particular car we have a 4-piston caliper up front and a single piston in the rear. We will also check the rotor width to see if it's worth saving. As you can see here, the OEM pads create an incredible amount of dust that the new pad should help eliminate. All of this coming up on Matt's Automotive Channel. Alright, let's go ahead and get this thing up in the air and get to work. Upon initial inspection here, you can see that these rotors, they've been around a while and they've worn quite a bit. There's a pretty good lip or ridge right here on the edges where the pad is. Now we can remove the factory rotor keepers that are installed in the factory. There is no need to replace these. Before further disassembly, make sure that the rotor spins freely. If not, this could indicate a problem. Also check around the brake area to make sure that there is no leaks or any broken hoses. Now on the front caliper there are 2 pins that hold the pad spring in place. All we need to do is knock the 2 pins out and then we can remove the brake hardware. Now we can slide both brake pads out. There we go. Let's pull that back and then that one out. Now we can remove the 2 bolts that hold the caliper on. With the caliper bolts out, we can now go ahead and remove the caliper. Do not let the caliper hang from the brake hoses for it could damage them. To relieve the strain, go ahead and hang the caliper up from the spring. Next, to remove the rotor from the hub. Note the dirt on these pistons that will need to be cleaned off. Note that some calipers have 2 bleeder screws. We'll be using the out one to compress the pistons. WD-40 works well for cleaning the pistons. Spray just a little bit of WD-40 on the rag, and this works pretty good for cleaning. It seems to just dissolve or melt that dirt and debris away. If there is enough material left on the rotors, you can sometimes have these machined down. The minimum thickness is stamped into the edge here, so we can go ahead and measure the thickness of the rotor and compare it to that minimum thickness to determine if these rotors can be machined down. Do not use calipers like this, for they'll measure the ridge on the edge. You'll need to use a micrometer that measures further down on the disc where the pads rub. Here we've determined that we only have less than 1 millimeter left on these discs, so these are trash. Okay, now we're about ready to expand the pistons. On this particular calipers, you'll notice that there's 2 bleeder screws. We're going to be using the outside one. So we'll hook up a hose to the outside bleeder screw and then loop it up over the spring. Alright, so here we go, and here's the ratcheting tool. So I'm just going to put them in here, line them up a bit, and to start the ratcheting, then you can feel it lined up here. And then I'm going to take this off here, and this is an 11 mm. Put this back on, and that way we can just crack this loose a little bit. Crack it loose, and then we can just start ratcheting this, and then you can see the brake fluid coming up here, just like so. No ratchet, so all we need to do is toggle this to the direction, and then just give it a few turns there, and then it'll just come right out. The pistons are nice and flush. The front passenger side. And we're going to hit it with a can of brake clean. Make sure there's no oil on this. Now let's put on a couple lug nuts to prevent the rotor from falling on our feet. Now at this time we can go ahead and remount the caliper. Torque to 85 pound-feet. Right, now let's take a look at the brake pads. You will notice that 2 of the brake pads have these wear indicators and 2 do not. So you'll want to match them up, one with and one without, and the brake with the indicator on it will go on the outside of the wheel. Reason for putting wear indicators on the outside is for easy inspection when wheels are off. Take note of illustration on grease packet to determine where to lubricate the pads. Don't want to use a whole bunch. I mean, just enough to coat these contact points. Also apply a thin layer of grease to the back of the pads where the piston makes contact. This will help eliminate squeaking. Now let's go ahead and slide pads in place. There we go. Here, one lubed up, and let's go ahead and slide that in now. The lube right here, and those little beveled edges, and then on the other side where the pin rubs. Now place a small screwdriver through the end of the caliper to make sure that the pads are aligned with the holes. Now we can put the second one in. Another flush over here on this side, and this should just barely be sure that it rotates very freely. So now we got the passenger side front done. So just basically repeat that process. It'll be identical for the other side. And so for the purpose of the video, we can go ahead and turn our attention here now to the rear brakes. Okay, so on the rear brakes, the very first thing you want to do is get inside the car and release the handbrake to relieve the tension on these calipers here. And then we're going to go ahead and take the caliper off with these 2 bolts here. On this car, it's a 13 mm. Okay, and so long as you have the handbrake released, this should just slide right off. And there we go. This one we don't really need to hang, we can kind of just set back here like so. And then we can go ahead and remove the old brake pads, just so you come right out. Okay, and then we can remove the old hardware. It's these 2 guys. Alright, now on the back side, we got 2 bolts, or 15 mm, that hold the caliper bracket on. So we'll go ahead and break these loose with a breaker bar. Now we can just lift the rotor off. Sometimes these rotors will be rusted to the back here, and in that case you can just kind of hit it with a rubber mallet and kind of break it loose. It's probably the easiest way to go if it's rusted on. Fit perfectly flush. So let's get this cleaned up as good as we can. Get as much of that rust off. Bracket off. It's a good idea to get all the debris off in these areas where the hardware sits. That way when you put it on, it'll sit nice and flat. Okay, while I have the caliper bracket off, just inspect these, make sure that the guide pins here slide in and out smoothly. I feel a little bit of roughness there and then also inspect the boots. Of course, with this kit we get new covers there and new hardware, so we don't really need to worry about that. So anyway, these just pull out. If you're lucky, I've seen them where they're rusting really bad. And since we're going to replace the boots, let's just pull these old ones off. And then we'll go ahead and clean the grease off of this and apply some new grease. And then we'll re-lube it using caliper grease. Make sure that you use caliper grease. This grease is designed to handle the heat that the brakes endure and won't turn to a gooey mess and run out. So I'll just put a thin coating there. And then we got the new boots. These are the same on both sides, so it doesn't matter. Just push it on until it snaps in place. And then the same thing here, just push this all the way in until it pops. And then make sure it spins and everything, nothing's bound, and make sure that the pin moves freely back and forth. First of all, in order to retract these pistons, they need to be rotated, so we need a special tool for that fits into these notches here and then rotates. But one of the things I want to mention up front here is, see the orientation of those notches, that they're lined this way. When you're done screwing the thing back in, make sure they're lined that way. Reason being, there's a little nub here, so that needs to fit in here. That's what prevents this thing from turning. And the reason that this one's different is because it's actuated two different ways. It's got the hydraulic system going to it, but it also has a cable running to it for the handbrake. And so they don't want this to spin. All right, here's the brake kit that I'm using. This is Pittsburgh. I believe it's from Harbor Freight. It's actually a pretty good kit. Has a lot of different sizes in it. And this is what we're going to use to screw the caliper in. And I already know this is the size we'll need for this particular job, the size 6. And the way that this works is that, okay, first of all, there's two of these devices here that each one of these little discs will plug into. One of them is a left-hand thread, one is a right-hand thread, so you need to figure out which one for your particular application. But anyway, that just magnetically couples here, and then we'll be able to thread the thing on. There's also a backing plate right here that we need to slide over like so. And then we'll go ahead and spin this back in, and then I'll show you how we go ahead and retract the piston. I go ahead and hit this with the Scotch-Brite and try to clean up this dirt here, because again, we don't want this debris here getting pushed back in behind the dust boot there. All right, as you may have already noticed, I already remounted the caliper bracket. You don't have to do this, but I find that it's much easier to retract the piston with this in place and bolted in. And also when you're bleeding the brake out, it just, everything stays in one place and it just makes life easier. So anyway, I got this thing set up here. I got the right size disc. So basically just put it in here, line up the pins, and then once the pins are lined up, you can thread this thing back out until it's nice and snug. There. That's in there nice and solid. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and put these caliper bolts back in just loosely to hold it in place. That way it'll stay in place when I thread this, and we can hook up the hose to the bleeder valve. Okay, just as we did on the front, we hooked up the hose, make it going up. That way no air will be introduced if anything does get sucked back in. Back here I didn't have the spring really to loop it over, so I just used a little clamp against the shock here. And so I'll go ahead and just crack this loose, and then we'll just start turning this, and this should run the piston back in, and we should see some brake fluid come up here. There it goes. And you can see it spinning the piston and then twisting in at the same time here. And you'll know when you're there, it'll bottom out and then it'll become very difficult to turn. In fact, it'll just stop turning. But again, when it stops, make sure that those little notches are lined up in this fashion. Okay, it's stopping there, so I'll go ahead and close the bleeder valve here. Do not create a mess. And you use just to pinch this out here and pull it out so it doesn't drip all over. All right, one quick note. Again, I want to emphasize the alignment of those little notches are very important. So anyway, you'll notice that these two dots here line up with this. So as long as when this is in here, you have this part pointed like this, 90 degrees to the caliper, you'll know that they're lined up properly. Wow, look at that. We definitely need to bleed the brakes. This fluid should be clear, so it's pretty nasty. Make sure that you clean this before you put it on. And verify that you have the right disc going onto the right side. Here's the rear passenger. All right, the torque spec for these rear caliper brackets is 79 pound-feet. Okay. All right, now let's put a little bit of lube on the hardware here. And remember with this, less is more. I mean, you just want very little on there, just enough to coat it. Because, you know, eventually, all this lube, it's going to attract dirt. And we don't want clumps of dirt everywhere, so just enough to coat it. All right, another reason you don't want a whole lot of grease on here is because you don't want any of it getting onto the rotor itself. So anyway, these just fit in here, tabs, and it should just kind of click in place, like so. There's one on the bottom, and then one up here on top. There we go, like so. All right, now on the caliper itself, on the piston, I'm just going to put a little bit here, and then also a little bit on the underside here, where the pads make contact. That will eliminate any kind of noise between these parts here. Again, any metal to metal part, you definitely want to have a little bit of lubrication there. And again, very thin layer there. Okay, now we can put our pads in. All right, the pad should pretty much just drop right in. On the side. Okay. And then you might want just a little bit of lubricant here on these springs where those rub. Just put like a real thin layer of grease there. I got some here, finger. Because again, that's a metal to metal contact. All right. Now we can go ahead and slide the caliper over the brakes. And another thing to be careful with is these slide pins, they have a little flat spot on them. Make sure that that flat spot coincides with the flat spot right here. The reason they have that is to prevent this pin from spinning. Let's see if I can get a better view of that. Not sure if you can quite see the flat spot there, but anyway, this needs to be rotated so it fits right into this little groove here. Inspect in here, make sure that the springs aren't cocked off to one side and they're both making contact. Okay, now I can put the caliper bolts in. And these don't get torqued down too much. So the torque spec on these guys here is just 24 pound-feet. For the caliper bracket, it's 79. But the pins that slide there, they don't need that kind of torque on them. All right, and then we'll go ahead and torque these to 24 pound-feet. All right, and then we're done. All right, the only thing left to do at this point really is just to go to each of the wheels, visually inspect everything, make sure that your bleeder screws are all torqued down, that there's no leaks, verify that the discs are all on the proper wheels, just make sure everything's in good working order. Also make sure that you put the brake back on before you lower the vehicle so it doesn't roll away. And then once we get the vehicle down, we'll go ahead and inspect the level of the brake fluid in the reservoir. And then we'll have to go out and take it for the drive to do the braking procedure. All right, now this next step is very important. I just did it, but you want to fire the engine up, and then remember the brakes aren't going to work right away because those pistons have to be expanded again. So anyway, you fire the engine up and then keep pumping the brakes until they no longer are soft, and then you know that the brakes are engaging with the rotors. And then go ahead and shut it off, and then check to make sure that you still have enough brake fluid in your reservoir. If not, you may need to add some. We still look really good here, and all that brake fluid that we took out was occupied by the additional thickness of the pads, so we didn't really lose any fluid here, even though we took some fluid out. the reservoir is still about the same. So anyway, real important to do that. The next thing we need to do is take it out and break in the brakes. All right, so here's the procedure to break them in. Basically, you need to take it out, get it on a road where there's very little traffic. Otherwise, somebody's going to think you're driving like an idiot, and you may even end up with a ticket. So anyway, what you need to do is 5 aggressive deaccelerating from 40 down to 10 miles an hour. And then after that, 5 deaccelerations, 35 to 5 miles per hour. Once you do this, the brakes are going to be extremely hot. You'll probably even smell them. And so that's why you don't want to stop, because the calipers get so hot and the brake pads get so hot. If you were to come to a stop, the heat would radiate from those pads back into the rotor and could potentially damage or warp the rotor. So this is why they say here to drive slowly, cool down your brakes for 5 minutes. So make sure you're in an area where you don't have to come to a complete stop, or if you do, make sure that you stop and then roll a few feet and then stop and then roll a few feet. But don't let the pads hit one place on those rotors. All right, that's pretty much it for this video. 2 of the most overlooked things, I think, when people do brakes are one is that braking procedure, and the other is bleeding the brakes. I mean, you saw how nasty some of that fluid was. These definitely need to be bled, and so I'm going to save that for our next video. So anyway, if you like this type of content, please like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you'll be reminded of videos going forward. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.